Good morning, Mobile, and all of our friends along the Gulf Coast. We are here again on Friday for Echo Stop Live podcast. I'm Kevin, and I am blessed, as always, to be sitting next to, I'm going to be honest, one of the greatest guys I know, a true man with a heart for the community. Curtis, welcome to the show.
It, man. Thank you.
So I got a surprise for you, Curtis.
What's your surprise, Kevin?
We don't have a guest today.
For shame.
But we have something even better than a guest today, as if I might even dare to say. We have a topic that I think is so current and so important if we're truly going to look at all the different things that play a factor, all the things that matter. It takes all of us, and part of all of us is how we communicate. So what are your thoughts if I say today we're going to talk about social media?
Dude, if you say talk about social media, where do we start? Where do we start? Seriously, where do we start?
Yeah. I mean, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So here's where I want to focus. And I don't want to say, hey, social media has been something bad. It's not. What I want to talk about is the things within social media that we can use for the good. I mean, so let me just be clear with all of our listeners, and we have a good audience of listeners who tune in each week faithfully to hear what we're having in this real conversation. But if we're going to have this real conversation, we got to talk about the good and the bad. But our goal is to get to where this tool kind of loses some of the negativity that we see out in society today.
I agree. You know, everything that moves us forward in society, you know, is always done with the intent for good, right?
I mean, I would think that a good
to
heart.
evolve.
Yeah.
But oftentimes those things that were created for good somehow get twisted to be something or being something that it was not truly intended to be.
Well, I think when we talk about perception, and if we say that perception, in fact, is a large portion of what our issue is, then misperception is also included within that. So let's talk about social media perception. But here's where I'm going to take a twist. But before I give you this secret twist that I think is really at the crux of this, I want to invite our viewers, especially today when we have this conversation, especially since we're talking about internet use and social media, to contact us with questions. And when we get to the last segment of the show, we'll try to read at least one question, and that's echostoplive@gmail.com, echostoplive@gmail.com. And also, I want to just remind our viewers that at any point, share this information, but we have an anonymous tip line. It's 844-251-0644. That's 844-251-0644. It's so important that we push this information out, and we really do encourage you, if you've got something to say, send us a question. Let us air that discussion. But when we talk about perception and misperception, Curtis, what does it mean to you if I tell you that individuals might even have a misperception of themselves?
That's very easy to believe. When we think about people and identity and people trying to create identities, they oftentimes look at someone else's image and they try to create their own image based off of that person's image. Am I too far off the mark?
No, I think you landed right on the edge.
All right.
But here's what I want. I want to tell you a story. So a couple of years ago, I went out and I was doing a presentation for some children in a school and some parents that actually showed up to this presentation, which really begets a whole nother show about parent involvement. But really, they were there, and we were talking about some of the dangers of the internet and social media. And you've done some of these presentations right alongside. And I brought out this analogy with this envelope, and I sort of created this evidence envelope. And I asked everybody to sort of kind of imagine what their future looked like and where they would work and what their jobs would be. And then I said, okay, and now you show up to go to that school, to go to that college, or just to get that job that you want. And the employer basically looks at you and says, hey, no problem. Everything's great. Let me just look inside this envelope and see what you've posted on social media for the past 10 years. can you undo what you've done when you've posted stuff? And does it really matter what your intention was versus how someone else receives it? And so when we talk about perception, misperception, what are your thoughts on, somebody has a good idea, they intend on posting something for a reason, and it's just a joke or it doesn't really mean anything to someone else, but someone else reads it the wrong way?
Well, that's easy to do because oftentimes once we do anything on social media, it's instant, right? It's permanent. You can't go back and say, oops. You can say oops, but you can't go back and fix it. It's out there. So it is important to be, what I like to say is conscientious. Really think about what you're doing before you do it. And you're a carpenter, right? Okay.
I have been known to turn some wood tools and put them to use.
Okay, turning wood tools. Okay, I like that. So when you go to cut, you measure twice and you cut once, right?
On most days.
On
Now,
most
if I was
days.
building you something, I'd probably just measure once.
No,
but-
man, I need you to measure
Okay,
twice,
I'll do
3
that.
times.
I'll do that. But I get where you're
you
going.
get
But
where I'm going,
absolutely,
right?
accuracy
Yeah.
and accountability
you have
is
to.
important.
You have to pause. You have to make sure that what I'm doing, is it the right thing to do? How will this affect me later? But yet, or better yet, how will this affect others that I care about, that I respect? Because I don't want to put out an image of me or someone that I care about for them to be hurt by the image that I put out.
And what you're talking about is hurting others by what you say.
Mm-hmm.
But, if the whole purpose behind EchoStop Live and the whole purpose behind Operation EchoStop is to hit the 4 corners of what's causing gang, gun, juvenile, and adult violence in our community and putting a stop to that violence through a holistic approach, then we'd be remiss if we didn't factor in how much social media truly weighs in on that. The fact that it's a tool to communicate rapidly can also incite violent behavior, can it not?
Well, it does all the time. We've seen national news. We've seen our own local news. We know how social media, things that are said or done mushroom into something much larger because someone didn't think about what they were saying, or maybe they did, but they did it with such emotion and anger that they didn't realize that once they cooled down, the damage was done. And they can't take back the words. And now they are left with trying to either defend those words or worse. And what we want people to do is understand how important it is for them using technology in this tool that is so advanced and so great. I tell people all the time, Kevin, that, technology has gotten ahead of us, right? So many people they understand it, they know how to use it, but they don't know how to apply it in a way that is truly beneficial to them.
So I got 2 analogies for you. When you have a student driver and they're first learning to drive a car, there's certain vehicles you'll put them in and there's certain vehicles you won't put them in because, to be honest with you, no matter how smart they are, they may not be equipped through experience on how to handle certain vehicles.
I like where you're going.
Right.
Yeah.
But yet we put them on the internet and we say, you can talk to anybody in the world. You can say anything to anybody that you want, and we'll let your consequences deal. Now that's not being sanctioned, right? People aren't saying you can say anything, but essentially we've given them the keys to have a voice with consequence without any of the same forethought we'd put in if they came to us and say, can I have the keys to the 18-wheeler that's parked out front and they've been driving for a week?
Right.
I mean, if we're talking real, let's have a real conversation.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I tell people all the time that you don't put a young driver, a new driver, in a vehicle with 500 horsepower. I mean, that's me. I don't know
Right.
how anyone else feels.
And I'm
about
driven
that.
with you. I wouldn't put you in a vehicle with 500 horsepower.
Oh, wow. Ouch.
Maybe 450.
Okay. 450. Okay.
But let me ask you
450
this
works,
question. Do you think it's possible to bully yourself?
Yeah. Is it possible
Sounds
to
ridiculous, but let me ask you the question. You want me to elaborate more?
bully? Yeah, please.
You want me to go down here for a minute? So if you put something out there, and we agree that when it's out there, and you can't take it back, and peer pressure is a factor, is it possible that while you're in the confines of your own home or within school and you're sort of surrounded and you feel comfortable to send a message, you send a message that sort of raises the ante on how you're going to have to behave? Like, hey, you might be one step closer to fighting with somebody.
Right.
And then you later decide after you cool down that, hey, that's probably not the smartest move. But now your friends are around you, and they're showing you the post that you made, and you've sort of committed. You've made this unofficial commitment. And I don't want to say there's any kind of political clout, but you sort of have social clout. Oh, are you going to back down? Are you not strong? Right? All of these pressures that they put on you when in fact the strong thing to do would be to, hey, that was not a smart decision. That was actually a stupid decision. But we don't see that all the time because our judgment is sort of corralled by the crowd, right? So can you bully yourself in a real roundabout way, Curtis? I'd argue that we can. I'd also say that there are so many things that are out there on social media that are controlling how we communicate. As a matter of fact, I've got a little clip I want to show you.
Okay.
You got a couple of seconds that really kind of highlights, what are we doing to build a better community through social media? Who are we? The words that we say. Are we making things better or just pretending to be? Use the tool to build a better place, a better community, a better tomorrow. So here we are. Let's talk about good culture and bad culture.
Let's talk about it.
How would you define the role of what we're seeing? I mean, this is everything from TikTok videos, Instagram, Snapchat, all of the different various platforms that are out there, and there's hundreds that we haven't mentioned that are being utilized by adults and children, and children will also mimic the behavior of the adults in our community, and sometimes it goes a little far. They're calling each other out, threatening each other, trying to locate each other, trying to even identify who these people are that might be associated with a different group of people for whatever reason, based on location or who you associate with. And then they're using this tool to instigate violent behavior. I mean, what kind of experiences do you have dealing with this? I know you guys are in the schools and have people that intervene in these situations. How can you elaborate on this?
I'm going to go a little deeper into the weeds with it because, again, we're talking about social media. We're talking about responsibility and accountability. The same way we would talk about giving the keys to a car to someone, you would expect them to be responsible with it, right? And accountable. Social media is no different. We have to be responsible and accountable. But when we're young, we make what we call decisions that young people make because we should have people to guide us. We should have our parents, right, to guide us and helping us actually navigate through some of these complex things. And social media is complex. It's not as simple as it looks. You may be technologically savvy in creating videos, but do you understand what you're actually putting out there? Do you truly understand the content? Okay, because what happens in reality is that these decisions are made because there's no parental guidance or wherewithal where a child or a young person can actually say to someone before they do something like that, is this the right thing? Because dare I say that young people can be very emotional. Their responses to things oftentimes is triggered by their emotion, not from the rational thought of thinking something out. That's why they have parents, right?
But there has to be involvement, right? There's all kinds of people that can serve as guardrails and barriers to keep bad things from coming into your life. And we've talked about this. Like, this isn't just a broken promise in law enforcement. This is a broken promise in the faith community.
Right.
This is a broken promise in the parental home life community, in the education system. And that's not to say any one of those entities are responsible. What I'm saying is the faith is not broken, but the people that interact with faith have lost their way in some regard or another. That's not to say the schools are broken, but people who interact with the schools have lost their way one way or another.
And let's clarify broken promise, because it's not broken promise in the sense that we're calling people out. What we're saying is that we're not being conscientious about the responsibilities that we have.
It's inconsistent.
It's inconsistent, exactly. A broken promise has more to do with the fact that we don't do as we say. We tell someone to do something, but then are we actually modeling the same behavior that we're asking someone to do?
No, and really when I refer to broken promise, and this is something we've talked about, this broken promise theory, really it has more to do with the social contract. I know we have some SRP moments on the show, and from time to time we go back in history. And if you want to go back in history, we go back to a point where there was sort of this social agreement, which really leads me to my next question for you.
I was just expanding your broken promise theory.
Well, it's no longer broken. Well, the promise maybe, but the explanation is certainly not. You filled in the gaps. But let me ask you this. So, before I said something and you kind of thought it was somewhat preposterous, and that is, can you bully yourself? But let me ask you this. Can something that is designed to bring society together actually serve the opposite purpose? Meaning, does social media actually become anti-social media in some regards?
Absolutely. I think we said that earlier too about how something good can be created with all the intent for it being good, but somehow and somewhere someone takes it and they manipulate it and they create something that catches and everyone starts to use it in a way that's negative. So yes, something good can become something bad when the intent is not thought out, or if the intent is intentional in creating it or using it for things that are not good.
So I'm going to go out and make this known. I started off the show by telling you this was a live show. It's a live broadcast. And so you're sitting here. You're not Facebook Living this with your own device. So if I were to tell people, as I told the viewers when we started, that, man, I couldn't have picked a better person to sit by my side, that I could not have found a person who believes more credibly in solving the problems and not calling people out for them. I could not have picked a better person to come and partner with me on something that was really started over a lunchtime conversation about, hey, can we just have a real conversation and get into the community? So I couldn't have done that. You're not Facebook Live in it. It's here. So I don't have to worry about you playing that for me over and over again, although you should. But let me ask you about that. What about the people that are using social media to capture the things that seem to excite them, maybe even anger others? And we have a huge problem with people calling 911, but we see a lot of people using their devices to capture 911 related events. How do we reconcile this type of activity?
You know, that's a tough question. I mean, I don't know how easy it is to answer, to be quite honest. You may have a thought that you want to share, but I think, it is hard to, as they say, to get the horse back in the barn. Once he's out, he's out. What do we do while he's out? How do we actually create secondary containments to keep him from going any further? So maybe we have to look at this from that standpoint on how do we actually create containments within what's already out.
Well, I think there are lifelong influencers, right? So the horse is out of the barn, but things in the environment are going to factor the way that horse behaves. And I think it's the same way. And I certainly don't want to compare people to horses.
No, you don't want to do that.
It's a great example that you use. But really, what I want to say is it's not too late to address the problem. Matter of fact, if we thought it was too late, Curtis, we wouldn't be doing this or any of the other parts. I mean, Operation Echo Stop is a four-corner approach that cannot survive missing any one of the four corners. Would you agree with that thought?
Absolutely.
So you and I are passionate about this, and we're saying the same thing, which is it's not too late. But I agree with you. We've already handed these tools out. The form of communication has become so ingrained in our daily life that it's, how do you take it back? So really the intent of this show was to have a discussion about social media where we talked about, okay, where do we go from here? How do you envision, what is the future? So we're imagining this series that we've been having on imagining better cities and trauma-informed communities. And so now we're talking about imagining better use of social media. What does a next step look like for you, Curtis?
Looks like something that we're doing currently right now with our school system called Kindness Counts, where we're asking young people to give us a short clip of something that motivates and encourages, that shows that they actually get it, that they actually do care, and that kindness truly does count. So we're asking them to be creative in explaining how does kindness count. And we're actually awarding young people for coming up with great videos so that we can say, hey, this is what we need. This is what we continue and want to encourage.
So I've got a question then. I mean, we're talking about influencers. We're talking about people that have an influence. How do we influence for the positive good and not influence to incite fights between groups that really sometimes, honestly, don't even know why they're fighting, other than it seems like the thing to do based on some issue they have, or it's a retaliation for something that's already happened. How do you stop that cycle?
It's hard, Kevin. I think it's hard because on a national level, we're seeing a lot of things that are very ugly, and it's being driven by different reasons, different factions. But the reality is that we have to fight that with the opposite of what they're doing. If on a national level, if they are putting out negative videos pertaining to it could be politics. It could be a number of different things. We have to somehow not find ourselves going with that flow of logic and doing something different like what we're doing in our schools right now. I mean, it's on a smaller scale, of course, but the reality is that how do we do something different? We do it by being intentional in trying to do something different.
Yeah, and I think intentionality really comes back to accountability. And we talk about rights and privacy rights, and people have all these ideas when it comes to social media. Yet we post everything about ourselves out there, and then we wonder why things come back at us. And I think there has to be a balance. And I've said this for a long time, and I believe this is an important factor. That freedom and safety are actually on opposite ends of the spectrum. You have speed limits. You have other things that are out there. We have to abide by these laws so that we can, in fact, have a safe society. In absence those boundaries, those laws, we might feel freer, but we may not be safer. And I think social media has some sort of internal standards that need to be part of the culture that we're teaching, both at school, at home, in our churches, and everywhere else that we have or should have a role of influence. And I feel like that's really part of it. But I got news for you, Curtis.
What's that?
We're going to stop for just a second and pause, and I've got a little riddle for you. It's called Fact or Fiction.
Oh, my goodness.
We are going to play a little game. You want to play?
I don't like games, man. Come on. Okay,
well,
let's go with it.
I don't know. I've heard otherwise, and so I think maybe there's a chance that you do like some games. So I got Fact or Fiction. Right. I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions here. I really like to make this a regular part of our show because I think people often write in and they have questions, and we can kind of dispel some of the myths. So let me go through. All you got to do is tell me fact or fiction based on your, on your belief here.
Let's go with it.
No right or wrong answers, except I have the right answers. So social media affects mental health. Fact or fiction?
Fact.
Okay. All right. Social media increases individuals' influence capacity at over 200% versus what they'd have in person.
Fact.
Yeah, that's just true. And on average, the American youth spends less than 3 hours on social media a day.
False.
Well, the word
fiction.
would be fiction.
Fiction.
Now, you call
fiction.
yourself.
I called myself.
Okay,
hey,
we almost had a Jeopardy
right.
moment there. But we caught ourselves. Well, you answered those really well. You passed the test. My commitment is that I always have fair questions, that I just increase the difficulty so that I can
turn up the dial just
I'm going to turn up
bit,
the dial just a little bit. But let's talk about that for just a second.
Yeah.
I mean, how fascinating is that? How much time are we devoting to schoolwork versus how much time are we devoting to social media? How much time are we devoting to fostering bad relationships versus how much time are we fostering to develop good relationships?
We're spending far too much time going in the opposite direction, as you stated with that. I think one of the biggest things, again, goes back to parenting. I'm going to say parenting because parents have to oversee the things that they need to oversee as it relates to social media with their children. Because if they don't, as that child becomes older, they have less influence on that child or that young person, and that young person tends to develop behaviors that are reinforced over time that will continue to be negative in how they use social media.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like if we're talking about using it for positive influencing, I think we talk about utilizing your presence, your perspective, and changing not only your perspective but others. If you want to influence somebody, influence them to take action. We always say, see something, say something, do something. That's a call to action. Speaking of calls to action, we got a question from Miranda. And she's asking, how do you monitor, or how should a parent or guardian or whoever is in the household monitor the behavior or the activity of a child on social media? And are there any warning signs? And Miranda, that is an amazing question, probably content of an entire show to itself. Right. But Curtis, do you have any thoughts on things that somebody could do if they were concerned? Let's take it a step further. If they were concerned about the behavior of their child online.
Well, Miranda, that's a great question. I think really ultimately what a parent should do or a guardian should do is be very conscientious about the fact that social media is the invisible person in the room. and you want to make sure that the invisible person in the room is seen by you. And if they're not seen by if they're not seen by you, then the chances are that they're going to probably greatly negatively impact your child. And I think as it relates to warning signs, they can vary. They can vary. I mean, basically, you should know your child. And if your child starts to be opposite of what you know your child to be, then those are the warning signs of letting you know that something may be going on. Are they spending more time in their room than usual? If so, where's their electronic device? Is it in the room? Are they not wanting to go to school? All these and so many different variations of signs that you need to look for, but ultimately it depends on the parent and the parent's relationship with the child. That's how you determine if there's something going on that's wrong, that's being created by social media.
And I would take it a step further, because I've heard you say on numerous occasions, every time you connect on social media, you're letting an invisible person of sorts
Right.
into your home, and we let thousands, if not hundreds, of people into our home, or hundreds, if not thousands. There has to be some guidelines and standards of who we let in our front door. But I think that was a great question, and I think it really goes to the core. We could probably talk about this for hours. You made a really logical statement when you said that.
I do that a lot, right?
Well, I just wanted to call this one out. I mean, I'm not saying there weren't others, but I thought I'd call this one out in particular. But no, you have really good information and sound advice, and so of course, I enjoy hanging out with you. This has been a great opportunity to hang out. I certainly want to remind our viewers that if you see behavior, not just a parent, but if you're in the community and you see behavior on social media or in the streets or wherever that concern you, we have an anonymous tip line. If you don't want to call 911, we certainly would urge you to do that. But we also have an anonymous tip line for this type of information. And that number is 844-251-0644. That's 844-251-0644. We'll certainly answer your questions. We certainly appreciate your anonymous tips. This has taken us to the end of the show for this week, Curtis. Another Friday morning with you. I really look forward to these opportunities. Last minute thought before we hand this back to our community watchers?
Have coffee next week, okay?
Have coffee next week. I've seen what happens when you drink coffee. And, we'll work on that. But thank you all for tuning in. We really look forward to the exciting conversation we're going to have next Friday morning at 8:30 on our Echo Stop Live podcast. And until then, be safe, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you again, Gulf Coast. Thank you so much.